The October morning hit differently at Riverside Training Facility in North Carolina. Cold enough to see your breath, warm enough that the sun cutting through the pine trees made you forget winter was coming. That's when the bus rolled up, dull green, windows tinted, engine rumbling like it had seen better decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 23 fresh recruits stepped off that bus, boots barely broken in, uniforms still creased from the package. They moved with that specific kind of confidence that comes from not knowing what you don't know yet. Drill Sergeant Patricia Moreno stood waiting, clipboard in hand, her expression carved from stone. Line up. Single file! You've got 10 seconds, and 7 of them are already gone. They scrambled, some faster than others. Marcus Webb, tall, broad-shouldered, college football scholarship that went nowhere, positioned himself front and center. Next to him, his buddy Tyler Hoffman cracked his knuckles, smirking at nothing in particular. Behind them, the others fell into place, faces from everywhere, stories untold, all united by the choice to be here. Welcome to week 7 of your basic training, Moreno barked, pacing the line like a shark. You think you've seen hard? You think those obstacle courses and midnight drills were the test? She stopped, letting the silence build. Today, you meet your firearms instructor. Today, you learn whether you've got what it takes or whether you're just wasting government resources. A few nervous glances exchanged down the line. Webb kept his chin up, chest out. He'd been waiting for this. Growing up in Detroit, his uncle had taken him shooting every summer. Tin cans off fence posts, paper targets at the range. He was good, better than good. This would be his moment to shine. Your instructor is arriving any minute, Moreno continued. You will show respect. You will show discipline. You will remember that the person teaching you has forgotten more about marksmanship than you will ever learn. Am I clear? Yes, Drill Sergeant. The chorus came back unified, sharp. That's when they heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, uneven. Not the crisp march of a soldier, but something else. Something that made a few recruits crane their necks toward the shooting range building. The door swung open, and out walked a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts at a military surplus store. 70 if he was a day, maybe older. His fatigues hung loose on a frame that had once been powerful, but now seemed held together by memory and stubbornness. White hair trimmed military short. Face mapped with lines earned in places most of these kids had never heard of, but it was his hands that caught everyone's attention. They shook, not violently but noticeably, a tremor that started at the fingers and worked its way up. The man carried a worn rifle case in one hand and a thermos in the other, both objects trembling slightly as he approached. Officer Caldwell, Moreno said, her voice dropping all the edge, replaced with something that might have been reverence. Your students are ready. The old man, Officer Raymond Caldwell, according to the name patch on his chest, set down his case and thermos. He surveyed the line of recruits with eyes that were still sharp, still calculating, despite everything else that time had taken from him. At ease, he said. His voice carried weight, gravel mixed with authority. I'm your firearms instructor for the next 2 weeks. Some of you are probably wondering why they put an old man with shaky hands in charge of teaching you how to shoot. He held up his trembling right hand, acknowledging the elephant no one wanted to mention. Fair question. We'll get to that. Webb exchanged a look with Hoffman. Hoffman's smirk had grown wider. Down the line, a few other recruits shifted their weight, clearly thinking the same thing. Who was supposed to teach them? Caldwell caught the looks. Of course he did. He'd been reading faces longer than most of these recruits had been alive. Before we begin, he continued, I want each of you to understand something fundamental. Shooting isn't about strength. It isn't about how steady your hands are. It isn't even about perfect vision, though that helps. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across them again. It's about discipline, control, respect for the weapon and what it can do. Master those, and the rest is just mechanics. He picked up his rifle case, unzipped it with those shaking hands, and pulled out a weapon that looked like it had stories of its own. An M14, maintained to perfection despite its age. This rifle, Caldwell said, has been with me for 47 years. Carried it through jungles you've only seen in movies, through deserts where the heat makes you see things that aren't there, through mountains so cold your trigger finger goes numb in 30 seconds. He ran a trembling hand along the stock. It saved my life more times than I can count. And I'm going to teach you how to make your weapon do the same for you. Some of the recruits stood straighter. A few looked genuinely interested now. But Webb was still skeptical. He'd heard the war stories before. Every old guy at every shooting range had them. What mattered was results. And he wasn't sure what kind of results you could expect from a man who could barely hold a coffee cup steady. "We'll start with the basics," Caldwell announced. "Range safety, proper stance, breathing techniques, trigger discipline. Then we'll move to live-fire exercises. By the end of 2 weeks, every single one of you will be able to hit a target at 300 yards. Or you'll run the obstacle course until you can." He smiled, not warmly, but with the confidence of someone who'd made that same promise 100 times and delivered every time. "Questions?" Silence. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. "Good. Grab your gear from the armory. Report to Range 4 in 15 minutes. Dismissed." The recruits broke formation, heading toward the armory building. Webb walked alongside Hoffman, their boots crunching on the gravel path. "Did you see his hands?" Hoffman muttered, keeping his voice low. "Man can barely hold his rifle without dropping it. How's he supposed to teach us anything?" Webb nodded. "Maybe he's just here for the lectures. Probably has some younger instructor doing the actual demonstrations." Behind them, a few other recruits had similar conversations. Quiet doubts, whispered questions. Only a handful remained silent, reserving judgment. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that Officer Raymond Caldwell had been brought out of retirement specifically for this training cycle. That 3 different base commanders had requested him personally. That his reputation in the marksmanship community was the kind of legend you didn't believe until you saw it yourself. And they were about to see it. Range 4 sat at the far edge of the facility, backed by a natural berm that rose 40 feet high. Targets dotted the landscape at various distances, 50 yards, 100, 200, 300. The recruits filed in, each carrying their assigned M4 carbine. Magazines loaded with training ammunition. Caldwell stood at the instructor's station, his trembling hands resting on the table in front of him. Next to him sat his thermos, his M14, and a pair of shooting glasses that had seen better days. "Form a line behind the firing positions," he commanded. "Today is observation only. Tomorrow you shoot. But first, you need to understand what right looks like." The recruits complied, forming a line about 20 feet back from the firing stations. Webb positioned himself where he'd have the best view, arms crossed, ready to be unimpressed. Caldwell approached the firing line, his M14 in hand. Those shaky hands worked the bolt with practiced ease, chambering a round. He settled into position, standing, no support, just him and the rifle. "Target 300 yards, he announced, his voice carrying across the range. "Standard issue paper target, center mass, 300 yards. There were nearly 3 football fields. Most of these recruits would struggle to hit that consistently, even with a supported position and ideal conditions. Caldwell raised the rifle, and that's when the tremor became really obvious. The barrel wavered slightly, describing small circles in the air. A few recruits exchanged glances. This was going to be embarrassing, but then something changed. As Caldwell settled into his stance, as his breathing slowed and his focus narrowed, the shaking gradually decreased. Not stopped, it never fully stopped, but diminished to something almost imperceptible. His finger found the trigger. The range went silent, except for the wind moving through the pines. Then he fired. The crack of the rifle echoed across the facility. "Downrange. At 300 yards, the target shuddered." "Check the target," Caldwell said calmly, lowering his rifle. Sergeant Moreno walked to the observation scope, peered through it, adjusted the focus. Then she looked up, and for the first time that morning she smiled. "Dead center," she called back. "Perfect shot." A few recruits murmured appreciation. Webb remained silent, unimpressed. Lucky shot, probably. Anyone could get lucky once. Caldwell seemed to read his mind. "Let's try that again," he said, his tone suggesting this wasn't really a suggestion. He chambered another round, settled back into position, and fired again. Same result. Center mass. Again. Same result. 5 shots total, 5 perfect hits at 300 yards, standing unsupported with hands that shook like leaves in a storm until they didn't. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now the murmuring grew louder. Even Webb had to admit, reluctantly, that this was more than luck. "Tomorrow," Caldwell said, turning to face the recruits, "you'll each take your turn. And the day after that. And every day until you can do what I just did, or at least get close enough that it counts." He paused, letting that sink in. "This isn't about proving how good I am. This is about proving how good you can become. Now get to the classroom. We've got 2 hours of safety briefings before you're allowed anywhere near a trigger." As the recruits filed past him toward the classroom building, Caldwell caught Webb's eye, held it for just a moment. No words exchanged, but the message was clear. Judgment deferred is not judgment erased. Webb looked away first, following his fellow recruits to class. Behind them, Caldwell picked up his thermos with those shaky hands, took a long sip, and smiled to himself. Another group of doubters. Another opportunity to teach an old lesson. Some things he'd learned long ago never got old. The classroom smelled like gun oil and old coffee. 23 recruits sat in metal folding chairs, notebooks open, pens ready. Officer Caldwell stood at the front, a projector casting diagrams of rifles onto the white wall behind him. "The M4 carbine," he began, tapping the image with a pointer, "fires a 5.56 NATO round at roughly 3,000 feet per second. That's faster than the speed of sound." "Which means what?" A hand shot up. Small-framed recruit named Jennifer Pacheco, sharp eyes behind military-issue glasses. "The bullet reaches the target before they hear the shot." "Sir, exactly right," Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Now why does that matter in combat?" Silence. The recruits looked at each other, uncertain. "Because," Caldwell continued, "it means your enemy doesn't get a warning. No time to duck, no time to return fire. One shot, one moment changes everything. That's why precision matters. That's why we train." He clicked to the next slide, a breakdown of shooting fundamentals. For the next 90 minutes, he walked them through everything. Proper grip, sight alignment, trigger squeeze, breathing patterns. His voice never wavered, never lost energy despite his age. The tremor in his hands remained constant, but his mind was sharp as broken glass. Webb took notes mechanically, his thoughts elsewhere. 5 perfect shots, standing 300 yards. He kept replaying it in his head, trying to find the trick, the explanation that made sense. Wind conditions had been calm, sure. Maybe the rifle was specially calibrated. Maybe those targets weren't actually 300 yards out. "Webb," Caldwell's voice cut through his thoughts. "Question for you." Webb's head snapped up. "Sir, you're a football player, correct? Or were?" "Yes, sir, linebacker. University of Michigan before..." He stopped himself. "Before you weren't," Caldwell finished for him. "Here's my question. When you were about to make a tackle, did you think about every single muscle movement? Did you calculate angles and force vectors?" "No, sir. You just do it." "Muscle memory?" "Exactly. Shooting is the same. You learn the fundamentals until they're automatic. Your conscious mind gets in the way more than it helps. Trust the training, and your body will do the work." Caldwell paused. "But first you need to build that foundation." "Which is what tomorrow's about," the lecture continued. Caldwell covered malfunctions, clearing procedures, range commands. Hoffman spent most of it doodling in his notebook. Cartoon rifles, explosions, stick figures. When Moreno walked past and caught him, her glare could have melted steel. He straightened up fast. By the time they broke for lunch, every recruit's head was swimming with information. They filed out to the mess hall, conversations bubbling up immediately. Did you see how steady his voice was? Pacheco said to her bunkmate Alicia Torres. Hands shake like crazy, but he never stutters, never loses his train of thought. "My grandfather has Parkinson's. Torres replied quietly. Started in his hands, too. Makes everything harder. You think that's what Caldwell has? Maybe, or just old age. Either way, what he did on that range, Torres shook her head in disbelief. That wasn't luck. At another table, Webb sat with Hoffman and two others, Chris Anderson and Kyle Brennan, both from rural backgrounds where hunting was a way of life. I'm telling you, Hoffman said around a mouthful of mashed potatoes, there's something we're not seeing. Maybe the rifle has some kind of stabilization system. Like those fancy camera gimbals, Anderson snorted. That was an M14 from probably 1970, no tech. Just iron sights and experience. So you're buying into the legend? Webb challenged. I'm saying I'll reserve judgment until we see more. But yeah, that was impressive. Anderson leaned back. My dad always said the best shooters aren't the guys with the steadiest hands. They're the ones who know how to work with what they've got. Brennan nodded agreement. Compensation. You learn to shoot in the space between heartbeats, time your trigger pull with your breathing. It's a whole science. Webb said nothing, just chewed his food and thought. That afternoon brought physical training, 2 miles of running, obstacle course, calisthenics, until their muscles screamed. Caldwell watched from a distance, making notes on his clipboard. Moreno drove them hard, her voice echoing across the facility. Faster, Webb! Your grandmother moves quicker than that. Hoffman, if I see you half-step one more rope climb, you'll do 50 burpees. Pacheco, good form! Keep that pace. By 1700 hours they were exhausted, sweaty, ready to collapse. But Caldwell wasn't done with them yet. Range 4, he announced. Dry fire practice. No ammunition, just mechanics. Let's see what you remember from this morning. Groans all around, quickly silenced by Moreno's death stare. At the range, each recruit received their M4 and a firing position. Caldwell walked the line, observing, correcting. His approach was different from Moreno's. Less yelling, more demonstration. When Hoffman's grip was wrong, Caldwell simply adjusted his hands with those trembling fingers, positioning them correctly. Feel that? Thumb along the side, not wrapped over. Gives you better control. When Torres struggled with her sight picture, he knelt beside her, a process that clearly hurt, judging by the grimace, and guided her eye to the proper alignment, both eyes open. Let your dominant eye do the work. The other one provides depth perception. Webb's turn came. He'd set up quickly, confidently, grip and stance textbook perfect from his uncle's training. Caldwell studied him for a long moment. Not bad. You've shot before? Yes, sir. Since I was 12, show me your trigger pull. Webb squeezed slowly, smoothly. The hammer dropped with a metallic click. Again, click. Again, click. After the 5th repetition, Caldwell spoke. You're anticipating the recoil, tensing up right before the hammer drops. With dry fire you can't tell, but with live rounds it'll pull your shots low and right. Webb frowned. How can you tell? Your shoulder dips. Tiny movement, maybe a 1/4 inch. But at 300 yards, that 1/4 inch becomes 2 feet. Caldwell demonstrated the correct form. Stay relaxed. Let the recoil happen. Don't try to control it before it exists. It was the most direct instruction Caldwell had given him. Webb tried again, focusing on staying loose. Better. Practice that 50 times tonight before bed. Dry fire in your bunk. Yes, sir. Caldwell moved on, but Webb felt something shift. The old man hadn't dismissed him, hadn't written him off. He'd seen a flaw and corrected it. Professional, precise. The dry fire session lasted an hour. By the end, every recruit understood the basics, at least in theory. Tomorrow they will tell me if they can apply for it. As the sun began setting, painting the sky orange and purple, Caldwell dismissed them to evening chow. But he called Webb back. Hold up a minute. Webb approached, uncertain. Had he done something wrong? Caldwell was packing his rifle case, those shaky hands working the zippers. Your uncle teach you to shoot? Yes, sir. Every summer growing up? He do a good job. You've got solid fundamentals. Caldwell closed the case. But you've also got something that's going to hold you back if you don't fix it. The anticipation. No, well, yes, but that's just a symptom. The real problem is you think you're already good. Caldwell's eyes locked onto Webb's. You think you know how to shoot because you've done it before. And maybe, compared to some of these kids, you do. But compared to where you need to be. You're starting from zero, same as everyone else. The words stung. Webb felt his jaw tighten. I'm not saying this to knock you down, Caldwell continued. I'm saying it because overconfidence gets people killed. In training, in combat, in life. The moment you think you've got nothing left to learn is the moment you stop improving. He picked up his thermos. Tomorrow, live fire. I want you to approach it like you've never touched a rifle before. Beginner's mind. Can you do that? Webb swallowed his pride. Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. Walking back to the barracks, Webb felt off balance. Part of him was angry. Who was this old man to tell him he wasn't good? But another part, a quieter part, recognized truth when it heard it. He had been cocky. He had been assuming this would be easy. 5 perfect shots at 300 yards with shaking hands. Maybe easy wasn't the right expectation. That night, lying in his bunk, Webb practiced his trigger pull exactly as instructed, 50 times. Staying relaxed, not anticipating, letting the mechanics happen naturally. Around him, other recruits did the same. The barracks filled with the quiet clicking of hammers, the sound of people trying to master something that seemed simple but wasn't. In his own quarters, on the other side of the facility, Officer Raymond Caldwell sat at a small desk, writing in a worn journal. The tremor in his hands made his handwriting shaky, nearly illegible, but he persisted. Day 1 notes, standard group. 3 with prior shooting experience, rest are blank slates. Webb has potential but needs humility. Hoffman is a clown but coachable. Pacheco and Torres show natural discipline. Anderson and Brennan have hunting backgrounds, good instincts. Weather tomorrow, clear, wind 5 to 8 mph from the east. Good conditions for their first live fire. They doubt me. They always do. That's fine. Doubt is just another kind of attention. He closed the journal, set down his pen, and reached for a photo on his desk. Faded, creased from being carried too long. 3 young men in combat fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling despite everything. Vietnam, 1972. Only one of those 3 men made it home. Caldwell touched the photo gently, a nightly ritual, then placed it back on the desk. Tomorrow, he'd teach these kids something important. Not just about shooting, but about what it meant to face your limitations and overcome them. He turned off the light, and the room went dark. Dawn broke cold and clear over Riverside. The recruits assembled at range 4 by 600, breath misting in the morning air. Each carried their assigned M4, magazines loaded with 30 rounds of live ammunition. The weight felt different now. Not just metal and polymer, but responsibility. Caldwell arrived 10 minutes later, driving an old Jeep that sounded like it was held together by faith and duct tape. He climbed out slowly, grabbed his rifle case and thermos, and approached the group. Sergeant Moreno stood ready, range safety officer badge clipped to her vest. "Good morning," Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "Today you transition from theory to application. Each of you will fire at targets from 50 yards, then 100. We'll work our way up over the next 2 weeks." He paused, scanning their faces. "Safety is paramount. You will follow every command exactly as given. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The response came back unified but tense. "Moreno, take the first group of 5. I'll observe and coach." Moreno called out names. "Pacheco, Torres, Anderson, Brennan, Hoffman, you're up. Everyone else, observation line." The 5 recruits moved to the firing positions while the rest hung back. Webb stood at the observation line watching intently. His hands felt clammy despite the cold. "Load 1 magazine," Moreno commanded. "Chamber around. Safety's on. Await my command." The metallic sounds of magazines clicking into place, bolts sliding forward, chambering rounds. 5 rifles now hot, pointed downrange at paper targets 50 yards out. Caldwell walked behind the firing line, observing stances. He stopped at Hoffman, whose posture was too rigid, shoulders hunched. "Relax," Caldwell said quietly. "You're not wrestling the rifle. It's a tool, not an opponent." Hoffman loosened up slightly, but tension still radiated from him. "Shooters ready?" Moreno called. "Ready!" 5 voices. "Safety's off." "Fire when ready." 3 rounds each. Pacheco fired first. The crack of her rifle made several observers flinch. Downrange, her target showed 1 hit, outer ring, high left. She adjusted, fired twice more. Both hits, closer to center. Anderson went next. All 3 rounds clustered near center mass. Good grouping for a first attempt. Torres fired carefully, deliberately. 2 hits, 1 miss completely. She grimaced. Brennan matched Anderson. Tight grouping, all hits, then Hoffman. His first shot went wild, missing the target entirely. His second clipped the edge. The third hit outer ring. Cease fire, Moreno ordered. Make safe. Chamber check. The 5 recruits engaged their safeties, dropped their magazines, pulled back their bolts to show empty chambers. Caldwell approached Hoffman. What happened on that first shot? I don't know, sir. I squeezed the trigger just like practice. You jerked it. Anticipated the recoil, tensed up, pulled the rifle off target. Caldwell demonstrated the motion. Your body tried to control something before it happened. Can't do that. The explosion happens whether you're ready or not. Your job is to maintain your sight picture through it. Hoffman nodded, frustrated with himself. You'll get another turn. Learn from it. The morning progressed group by group. Some recruits showed natural aptitude. Others struggled with basics despite the dry fire practice. Webb's turn came in the 3rd rotation, alongside 4 others whose names he barely knew. Daniel Foster, Rebecca Chen, Marcus Sullivan, Nicole Bryant. His heart rate picked up as he loaded his magazine. 30 rounds felt heavy in his hands. He chambered 1, clicked the safety on, and waited. Fire when ready. 3 rounds. Webb took a breath, released half of it, found his sight picture. The target stood crisp and clear through his iron sights. He remembered his uncle's voice. Squeeze, don't pull. Surprise yourself, he squeezed. The rifle kicked into his shoulder, harder than he'd expected despite knowing it was coming. The sound hammered his ears, even through the protection. Downrange, his target showed a hit, just left of center mass, better than some. Not as good as he wanted. Second shot. He adjusted slightly right, squeezed again. Closer to center, 3rd shot. Dead center. Cease fire. He safed his rifle, feeling a surge of satisfaction. 3 for 3. Not perfect placement, but all hits on a man-sized target at 50 yards. Caldwell appeared at his shoulder. Good shooting. Solid fundamentals. Thank you, sir. Now do it at 200 yards and we'll be impressed. The comment deflated his pride instantly. Caldwell moved on before Webb could respond. By 1,000 hours, everyone had fired their first 3 rounds. Results varied wildly. Some recruits hit consistently, others were lucky to hit paper. But everyone had crossed the threshold from training to actual shooting. Caldwell called them together. Range evaluation. You're all alive. Nobody shot themselves or anyone else. So that's a win. But we've got work to do. He gestured to the targets downrange. Shooting at 50 yards is easy. The rifle does most of the work. 200 yards? That's where skill matters. 300? That's where you separate soldiers from amateurs. He let that settle, then continued. This afternoon, we're moving 100 yards. Distance doubles, difficulty quadruples. Wind becomes a factor. The sight picture gets smaller. Any questions? Chen raised her hand. Sir, how do you compensate for the wind? Good question. Wind reading is part science, part art. You look at flags, grass movement, mirage if it's hot enough. A 5-mile-per-hour crosswind at 100 yards moves your bullet maybe 2 inches. At 300 yards, 8 inches. Miss your target completely if you don't account for it. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. I'm giving each of you a cheat sheet with wind call estimations. Study it during lunch. They broke for a midday meal. The mess hall buzzed with excitement, nerves, and competition. Nobody had failed yet, but the challenges were clearly escalating. Webb sat with his usual group. Anderson was animated, demonstrating his shooting stance with an invisible rifle. Did you see Brennan's grouping? All 5 shots within a 4-inch circle. That's insane for a first time. He hunts deer back home, Foster added. Probably been shooting since he could walk. Hoffman stabbed at his food glumly. I can't believe I missed it completely. 50 yards! My grandma could hit that. You tensed up, Webb said. Caldwell told you. You'll fix it. Easy for you to say. You went 3 for 3 at 50 yards. Like he said, easy distance. Torres leaned in from the adjacent table. You hear what happened with Bryant? What? She had a panic attack after her first shot. Too loud, too sudden. Moreno had to pull her off the line. She was crying in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Webb frowned. Bryant had seemed confident enough during classroom training. But theory and reality were different countries. Is she okay? She's back on the range this afternoon. Caldwell's giving her some one-on-one coaching. Torres shook her head admiringly. That old man's got more patience than anyone I've ever met. Afternoon session started at 1300 hours. True to Torres's word, Bryant was there, pale but determined. Caldwell worked with her separately while Moreno ran the main group, 100 yards. Targets looked smaller now, details harder to distinguish. The wind had picked up, maybe 8 miles per hour from the east, pushing left to right across the range. Account for wind, Moreno reminded them. Aim slightly into it. Let it push your round back to center, first group up. Pacheco, Torres, Anderson, Brennan, Sullivan. They settled into firing positions, loaded magazines, chambered rounds, 5 rounds each. Take your time. Fire when ready. The shooting began. Cracks echoed across the range in irregular rhythm as each recruit fired at their own pace. Downrange, spotters with binoculars called hits and misses. Pacheco, 4 hits out of 5. Torres, 3 hits. Anderson, 5 for 5. Brennan, 5 for 5. Sullivan, 2 hits. Solid performance overall, though the increased distance was clearly causing problems. Shots that would have hit at 50 yards now sailed past targets or struck outer edges. Group 2. Group 3. Results remained mixed. Some adapted quickly to wind compensation. Others struggled to adjust their point of aim. Webb's turn came in Group 4. He'd studied the wind flags during the previous rotations, watched how much movement the breeze caused. 5 to 8 miles per hour, maybe a bit more in gusts. Aim left edge of center mass, let the wind drift it back. Fire when ready, first shot. He aimed left as planned, squeezed. Downrange, the spotter called, hit outer right. He'd overcompensated. The wind wasn't as strong as he thought, or he'd aimed too far into it. Second shot. He adjusted, aiming closer to center. Hit center mass, better. He was dialing it in. Third shot. Hit center left. Fourth shot. Hit center. Fifth shot. Hit center. 4 solid hits out of 5. Not perfect, but respectable. Caldwell appeared again, clipboard in hand. Adapting to wind. Good instinct. Thank you, sir. Keep that mindset. Every range session teaches you something new. Weather changes, conditions shift. Static knowledge gets you killed. Adaptive thinking keeps you breathing. By 1600 hours, everyone had completed the 100-yard drill. Caldwell gathered them for debrief. Better than I expected, worse than you need to be. We're progressing. He consulted his clipboard. Tomorrow, more 100-yard work, then we introduce moving targets. Day after that, we start working toward 200 yards. By week's end, you'll all attempt 300. He looked up. And that's where things get interesting. Hoffman muttered to Webb, interesting meaning impossible. Webb didn't respond. His mind was already working ahead, calculating. If 100 yards with wind was this challenging, what would 300 be like? And how did Caldwell make it look effortless, with hands that shook like earthquake aftermath? Dismissed, Caldwell announced. Clean your weapons. Study your wind tables. Get some rest. Tomorrow we push harder. As the recruits filed out, Webb noticed Caldwell remained behind, staring downrange at the targets. His hands rested on the table in front of him, trembling as always, but his expression was distant. Remembering something, maybe, or preparing for something. Webb almost asked what he was thinking, then decided against it. Some questions weren't meant to be answered with words. He left Caldwell alone with his thoughts and his memories, while the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Range 4. Day 5 brought rain. Not the gentle kind that whispers against windows, but the aggressive North Carolina downpour that turns dirt into mud and visibility into a guessing game. The recruits showed up at Range 4 soaked within minutes, ponchos doing little to keep the water out. Caldwell stood under a covered observation post, dry and unbothered. His thermos steamed in the cold air. Weather doesn't stop bullets, he announced as they assembled. Enemy doesn't check the forecast before engaging. Today you learned to shoot in adverse conditions, groans rippled through the group. Hoffman looked particularly miserable, water dripping from his helmet onto his nose. 200 yards, Caldwell continued. Rain affects your visibility and can push lightweight rounds off course. You'll need to compensate for both wind and precipitation. Questions? Nobody asked. They were too cold, too wet, too focused on just getting through the day. First group, you're up. Pacheco, Torres, Anderson, Brennan, Foster, firing line. The 5 recruits slogged through mud to their positions. Rain hammered the metal roofing above the firing stations, making verbal communication nearly impossible. Moreno used hand signals instead. Load chamber ready. Anderson fired first. Through the rain, the spotter could barely track the round. Miss! He adjusted, fired again. I hit outer ring! The conditions were brutal. Water dripped into eyes, fogged up glasses, made grips slippery. Pacheco managed 2 hits out of 5. Torres got 3. Brennan, usually consistent, only hit once. Foster went 0 for 5. By the time Webb's group took the line, the rain had intensified. 200 yards might as well have been 2,000. The targets were grey ghosts in the downpour. Webb wiped water from his face, settled into his stance, and tried to find his sight picture. Rain pelted his rifle, ran down the barrel. He aimed for center mass, accounting for wind, for rain, for everything Caldwell had taught them. He squeezed the trigger. Through the scope, the spotter called, "Miss!" Frustration flared. He'd done everything right, hadn't he? 4 more shots. 2 hits, both outer ring. Not good enough. Not even close to the standard Caldwell had demonstrated. When his group finished, Webb stepped back from the line, angry at himself, angry at the weather, angry at the impossible expectations. Caldwell materialized beside him. Tough conditions. Yes, sir. Know what's tougher? Getting shot because you can't hit what you're aiming at. The old man's voice carried no sympathy, just hard truth. Rain doesn't care about your feelings. Neither does combat. You adapt or you fail. Simple as that. Webb bit back a retort. What did Caldwell know about his specific struggles? The man made everything look easy with his decades of experience and his, "Want to know a secret?" Caldwell interrupted Webb's thoughts. I missed my first 20 shots in the rain. Trainee just like you, Fort Benning, 1968. Couldn't hit dirt if I fell off a horse. My instructor told me I'd wash out, suggested I try supply chain instead of infantry. He paused. Know what I did? What, sir? I came back every night for a month. Dry fire practice in the rain. Stood out there like an idiot, rifle pointed at nothing, practicing my sight picture in the worst conditions I could find. Caldwell's trembling hand tapped Webb's rifle. Eventually, rain became just another variable. Not an excuse, not an obstacle, just information to process. He walked away before Webb could respond, moving to coach the next group. The session ended at 1100 hours. Everyone was drenched, exhausted, and demoralized. Hit rates had plummeted across the board. Even the best shooters struggled to maintain accuracy. Lunch was a somber affair. Bryant, who'd overcome her panic attack and been improving steadily, had reverted back to missing most shots. Chen had slipped in the mud and twisted her ankle. Sullivan was questioning whether he belonged here at all. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, Sullivan muttered, staring at his untouched food. Back home I thought I was decent with a rifle. Here, I'm garbage. You're not garbage, Pacheco said firmly. You're learning. We all are. Caldwell made 5 perfect shots in calm conditions on day 1. We can't even hit targets in the rain. He's had 50 years of practice, Webb interjected. We've had 5 days. Doesn't matter. Some people have it, some don't. I'm starting to think I don't. Torres leaned forward. You know what my abuela used to say? Falling down doesn't make you weak. Staying down does. Rain sessions sucked for everyone. Tomorrow will be better, but tomorrow brought its own challenges. Day 6 was clear and bright, perfect conditions. Caldwell announced they'd be attempting 300 yards by the end of the week, so today was preparation day. 250 yards, elevated positions, shooting from prone instead of standing. Prone is the most stable position, Caldwell explained, demonstrating despite the obvious discomfort it caused his aging body. Lower center of gravity, bone support, better recoil management. At extended ranges, it's your best friend. The recruits spread out along the firing line, getting into prone position on shooting mats. It felt awkward at first, elbows digging into ground, neck craned at an uncomfortable angle. Rifle heavy in unfamiliar hands. Adjust your position until you're comfortable, Caldwell instructed, walking the line. You should be able to stay here for an hour without cramping. Find your natural point of aim, where the rifle points at the target without muscle tension. Chen struggled with her injured ankle, the prone position aggravating it. Caldwell noticed immediately. Chen, you're out today. That ankle needs rest. Report to medical. Sir, I can shoot. That's an order, not a suggestion. Injury now means longer recovery. Smart soldiers know when to push and when to back off. Chen reluctantly left the range, limping slightly. The remaining recruits continued adjusting their positions. Webb found his natural point of aim after several minutes of shifting. The rifle settled into his shoulder, sights aligned with the distant target without him having to force it. Much better, Caldwell said, observing his position. That's what right looks like. The shooting began. 250 yards, farther than most of them had ever attempted. The targets looked impossibly small, barely visible details at that distance. Anderson fired first from his group. His round hit low and left. He adjusted elevation on his sights, compensated for the slight breeze, fired again. Closer. Third shot struck inner ring. By his fifth shot, he was consistently hitting near center. Brennan performed similarly, initial misses followed by corrections, ending with solid hits. But others struggled. Hoffman couldn't find consistency. His shots scattered across the target face with no discernible pattern. Foster was worse, missing the target entirely more often than not. When Webb's turn came, he took his time, breathing slowly, heart rate calm, remembering everything he'd learned. The first shot surprised him. It always should, according to Caldwell. Downrange, the spotter called, "Hit! Center mass!" Confidence surged. He fired 4 more times, each round finding the target. Not all center mass, but all hits. Progress. By the end of day, fatigue had set in. Prone shooting used different muscles, creating different stresses. Everyone's elbows were raw, neck stiff, back sore. Caldwell gathered them for final debrief. Tomorrow, you all attempt 300 yards. That's the qualification standard. Hit at 300, and you're proving you can perform under pressure at distance. His eyes swept across their tired faces. Some of you will pass. Some won't. That's reality. But everyone gets the chance. That evening, the barracks hummed with nervous energy. 300 yards felt like an impossible distance. Webb lay in his bunk, visualizing the shot. Sight picture breathing trigger squeeze. Over and over in his mind. Across the room, Hoffman sat on his footlocker, head in his hands. You all right? Webb called over. I'm gonna fail tomorrow. I know it. You don't know that. I've barely hit at 250. 300? No chance. Hoffman looked up, frustration written across his face. And you know what the worst part is? Caldwell does it like it's nothing. Standing up, hands shaking, no problem. Makes me feel like an idiot, Webb sat up. He's been doing this since before we were born. That experience counts for something. Or maybe some people are just naturals, and the rest of us are pretending. Before Webb could respond, the barracks door opened. Sergeant Moreno stepped in. All business as usual. Lights out in 10 minutes. Big day tomorrow. Get rest, she left. The recruits began their nightly routines, cleaning rifles, organizing gear, reviewing notes. Webb pulled out Caldwell's wind table cheat sheet and studied it one more time. Wind from the east, adjust left. Wind from the west, adjust right. Headwind, aim low. Tailwind, aim high, 300 yards. Tomorrow they'd find out who had what it took. And more importantly, they'd finally see if the old veteran's opening demonstration was luck, skill, or something in between. Webb turned off his small reading light and lay back. Sleep came slowly, his mind racing with trajectories and compensations and doubts. Somewhere across the facility, Caldwell sat in his quarters, that old photograph on his desk, catching lamplight. 3 young men who'd learned to shoot together in another era, another war. He picked up his pen and added to his journal, trembling handwriting filling the page. Tomorrow is their first real test. 300 yards separates amateurs from marksmen. Some will surprise me. Others will surprise themselves. A few will fail, and that's okay. Failure teaches more than success ever can. They still doubt these shaking hands. Good. Let them doubt until they don't. He closed the journal and prepared for sleep. Knowing tomorrow would be the day, everything changed. Day 7 arrived with crystal-clear skies. No rain, no excessive wind, just perfect shooting conditions. The recruits assembled at range 4, knowing this was it. 300 yards. Pass or fail. Caldwell stood at the instructor station, his M14 resting against the table. Today's qualification is simple. 5 shots at 300 yards. 3 hits minimum to pass. Questions? Silence. Every recruit understood what was at stake. We'll go alphabetically. Anderson, you're first. Anderson approached the firing line, settled into a prone position, and loaded his magazine. The target downrange looked impossibly small, a tiny silhouette against the distant berm. He fired 5 deliberate shots. The spotter called the results. Hit, miss, hit, miss, hit, 3 hits. Anderson passed. Relief washed over his face as he cleared his weapon. One by one, recruits took their turn. Brennan passed with 4 hits. Pacheco passed with 3. Torres barely made it with 3 hits, her last shot striking the outer edge, but others struggled. Foster managed only 2 hits. Sullivan got 1. Bryant, despite her improvements, hit twice, but missed 3 times. Then came Hoffman. He positioned himself, visibly tense despite Caldwell's coaching all week. His first shot missed completely. Second shot missed. The third shot clipped the edge, a hit, but barely. 2 shots remaining. He needed both to pass. 4th shot. Miss. Every recruit watching felt the tension. 1 shot left. 1 chance. Hoffman took a long breath, steadied himself and squeezed the trigger. Miss. He'd failed. 1 hit out of 5 at 300 yards. Hoffman cleared his weapon mechanically, his face a mask of disappointment. As he stood, Webb caught his eye and nodded. Solidarity in failure wasn't much, but it was something. Webb, you're up. Webb moved to the firing line, his heart hammering. Everything came down to this. He assumed prone position, checked his natural point of aim, loaded his magazine. The target stared back at him across 3 football fields of distance. Wind flags showed a slight breeze from the east, maybe 3 miles per hour. Minimal compensation needed. First shot. Hit center mass. Second shot. Hit inner ring. 3 more to go. He'd already passed, but something drove him to keep pushing. Third shot. Hit center. 4th shot. Hit outer ring. 1 shot left. 4 for 4. Could he go perfect? He settled his breathing, found his sight picture one last time, and squeezed. Hit center mass. 5 for 5. Perfect score at 300 yards. Webb stood, surprised at himself. The other recruits offered quiet congratulations, but his attention was on Caldwell, who simply nodded approval. The morning continued. More recruits attempted, more results recorded. By 1100 hours, 14 had passed, 9 had failed. Caldwell gathered everyone together. Those who failed will retest next week after additional training. No shame in it. This is difficult shooting under pressure. He paused. But there's something I want to show you all. Something about why I teach this course despite these. He held up his trembling hands. Curiosity rippled through the group. Even Hoffman looked up from his disappointment. Caldwell walked to the firing line with his M14. Special target today. Range officer set up the steel plate at 300. Moreno radioed downrange. 2 range workers wheeled out a steel target, not paper, but a solid metal plate about 12 inches wide. They positioned it at the 300-yard mark and retreated to safety. Steel plate, Caldwell explained. 12 inches across. Difficult target even for experienced shooters. He loaded a single round into his rifle. But here's what you haven't seen yet. He chambered the round and settled into standing position, the same stance from day 1. His hands shook as they always did, the rifle wavering slightly. Then something remarkable happened. As Caldwell's breathing slowed and his focus narrowed, the tremor didn't just decrease, it seemed to synchronize with something internal. His hands still moved, but now they moved with purpose, compensating in real time for every micro-adjustment needed. He fired. 300 yards away, the steel plate rang like a bell. Dead center hit. The sound echoed across the range, but Caldwell wasn't done. Range officer, replace that target with the demonstration plate. Moreno looked confused, but complied. The range workers swapped the solid steel plate for something different, a special target plate with a thin vertical seam down the middle, designed to split apart on precise center hits. This target, Caldwell announced, requires perfect shot placement, not just hitting the plate, but hitting the exact center seam. I'm going to show you what 50 years of practice looks like when you refuse to let limitations define you. He loaded another round. Every recruit held their breath. Caldwell raised the rifle once more. His hands trembled. The barrel made tiny circles in the air, but his eyes never wavered from the target. He fired. The crack of the rifle echoed. Then 300 yards downrange, the impossible happened. The steel plate split perfectly in half, both pieces falling away from the center seam. A shot so precise, so perfectly placed, that it had literally cut the target in two. Absolute silence blanketed the range. Then someone started clapping, Torres maybe, or Anderson. Within seconds, all 23 recruits were applauding, even those who'd failed their qualification. Hoffman stared at the split target, mouth open. Webb felt goosebumps despite the warm morning sun. Caldwell lowered his rifle, those shaky hands still trembling as they always would. He turned to face the recruits. You all saw my hands when you arrived. Some of you doubted whether I could teach you anything. That's fair. I looked like someone who couldn't hold a coffee cup steady. He set down his rifle. But shooting isn't about having perfect hands. It's about perfect discipline, perfect focus, perfect respect for the fundamentals. My hands shake because of nerve damage from an old injury. They'll shake until the day I die. But I learned to work with them, not against them. He let that sink in. Some of you passed today. Some didn't. But all of you are better shooters than you were a week ago. That's what matters. Improvement, adaptation, refusing to accept limitations as permanent barriers. He picked up his thermos with those trembling hands. You've got one more week with me. Let's make it count. As the recruits dispersed for lunch, Webb lingered at the range, staring at the split target downrange. Hoffman joined him. I judged him, Hoffman said quietly. First day I thought he was a joke. Old man with shaky hands trying to teach us something he couldn't do himself. We all did, Webb admitted. I was wrong. And now I've got to spend next week proving I can be half as good as he is. They walked back together, humbled and inspired in equal measure. Behind them, Caldwell packed up his gear, allowing himself a small smile. Another group of doubters converted. Another lesson taught not through words, but through demonstration. His hands would always shake. His body would continue aging, but his skill, earned through decades of refusing to quit, that would remain sharp until the very end. He picked up the photograph from his equipment bag, looked at those 3 young soldiers from another lifetime, and whispered, "Still teaching them, brothers, still teaching them." Then Officer Raymond Caldwell climbed into his old Jeep and drove away from Range 4, leaving behind recruits who would never forget the day they learned that limitations are only permanent if you accept them as such. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the North Carolina pine trees, while downrange a split steel target lay in 2 perfect halves, proof that mastery transcends circumstance, and that the steadiest shot doesn't always come from the steadiest hands. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.